Hello friends, my name is Marines and this is the start of a weekend reading vlog. I've been at my new job for a couple of weeks now and I keep joking with everyone there that I feel like the new baby at the daycare. Like I need so many naps. For the last couple of weekends, I have just been like sitting on my couch with all of the windows closed and like recovering from the mortifying ordeal of being perceived so much. But I'm feeling energetic heading into this weekend. So I'm in the middle of a number of books and I realized that 3 of them actually have a good theme for a weekend reading vlog, very timely theme. They are books written by Latine authors. First up is The Sun in the Void by Gabriela, Romero, Lacruz, and I'm 44% of the way through this. Next is one of my most anticipated reads of this year, and that is Family Lore by Elizabeth Acevedo. I really enjoy Acevedo's YA, but every time I read one of her YA books, I have that feeling of like, I wish I had read this when I was like the target audience. So this is her first adult novel, and so I was just really excited to read it. I started reading it immediately when I got it and got 106 pages in, which was the first part, and I put it aside for God knows what reason. Like I put it down for the night and I haven't been back to it yet, but I was very much enjoying the first part of this. There are a few things that like are a little awkward and uncomfortable in a way I think that they're supposed to be, but we'll see. I'm not a big like family saga person either, but her writing is just so rich and so delicious, and her characters and her themes and her places always really make me feel at home. And finally, Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas, and this is my pick for my Fable book club, which is open to anybody to join. It was originally supposed to run from August 15th to September 15th, but with everything going on with my job, I just didn't get this read in time, so I'm extending it to the end of October. And in October, we'll pick a new book, which is going to be a backlist book. We're going to be buddy reading Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I've got to finish this up for September. I read the first 2 chapters, which is 24 pages, and I loved them. I loved them. I love them so much. I love the language that she's using, how rich it is in metaphors. I immediately was invested in these 2 characters. Like my heart went out to them so quickly, which I always find that super impressive when authors can manage to do that. So I'm excited to read the rest of this. I think that this is gonna just like absolutely land for me. I hope so, because the first 2 chapters really like built it up. So these are the 3 books that I'm going to try and finish this weekend. I almost did like, if I do, here are some more, but for a girl who hasn't read any books this month, that's like very optimistic. So we'll leave it there and we'll see how far we get. I almost said good morning. It is decidedly not morning, but I've been pretty productive today. I started off the day sleeping in a tiny bit and then reading in bed for a while, and I got to 55% of The Sun in the Void. This is stressing me out a lot. The characters are in like peril, in dire situations, and I'm reading it pretty closely, so it feels like it's slow going to get through that, but I'm still like invested in what's happening and in the characters. And more than anything, I'm frustrated that this could have been better edited, because I feel like the author is being really bold with her choices and is exploring a heck of a lot, and I think the work itself could have been tightened overall. I really want to get this done this weekend and I'm making slow progress, but then I got up, I took Charles Bingley for a walk, and I've been cleaning on and off since then. I've taken a couple of breaks. I also like paid bills and did some budgeting and cried a little bit over that. I've also been laying out fall decor, so like in going here, there, and everywhere, and like finding a place for all my pumpkins basically. That's taken up some time as well. I do have both Vampires of El Norte and Family Lore on audiobook. But for both of those books, I really want to like read it with my eyeballs. For Vampires of El Norte, because I'm doing that through Fable, through my book club, I want to be able to like pull out quote and talk about things at a more granular level. And with Family Lore, the writing is like the main draw there, and there are so many characters that I think reading along will also be very helpful. So I was like, okay, that was my entire TBR until I remembered that I did also have have another book, specifically an audiobook that I really wanted to listen to, and that was Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is also a horror book, or like horror adjacent enough that like listening to it on a Saturday morning while cleaning was like the correct vibe. And I am 42% of the way through that audiobook. I should be able to get that done today, honestly. I'm engaged, I'm interested. I find it a little slow paced, especially because I felt like I knew where we were going and it was like kind of dallying to get there. And now I'm very curious like where this is going to go next, but it is keeping me engaged. Honestly, I stopped to record this update because I'm feeling tired. And I sat on the couch and I was like, oh no, I still have so much to do. Okay, let's go. I finished reading Silver Nitrate relatively late last night. Like I went to bed. I tried to go to bed pretty soon after that. I did some scrolling, and because I did some scrolling, I didn't go to sleep right away. I woke up so late this morning and I had a few plans, like I needed to get out the door. So I didn't record any footage this morning. I went to my mom's house and spent some time with my family, and then I met friends up for lunch, and I have absolutely not even a second of any of that footage. I was so like flustered this morning when I left the house. And so I got here and it's Sunday night and I was sitting here like thinking, am I even going to record this clip? Is this another like vlog that will never see the light of day? But I was like, you know what? Just do record the clip, extend the vlog for a day. This is a long weekend reading vlog, we'll say. You know, we do what we want. Okay, so let's talk about Silver Nitrate. Even the books by Silvia Moreno-Garcia that are not my favorite are still like really solid, very good books. And I feel like Silver Nitrate is in like that 3.5 star of the books that like aren't my favorite of hers, but that I can still really appreciate for what they do. Particularly in this book, there's just a sense of how much Moreno-Garcia appreciates film. It goes a little off the rails to me at the end, but in a way that feels very purposeful, that feels very hokey, that feels very like pulp horror to me as somebody who actually does not know much about this genre at all. I do not enjoy horror films, and I only read like a select number of horror books per year. This wasn't too spooky for me. I was reading it mostly during Saturday morning, but I did finish it Saturday night, and it was totally fine for me. There was something, because it was a little like off the rails, a little hokey, there was something removed enough for me that even when like the spooky ooky did show up, like it just wasn't particularly scary for me. One of the things that I love most about Moreno-Garcia is how she creates like really complex and complicated characters. They're people that you like, one page you're rooting for, the next page you kind of want to punch. And she also creates these complicated characters and puts them into some like really complicated relationships. And particularly our two main characters, like I just like, sometimes I was like, please just make up, be friends. And sometimes I was like, everybody to your own corner, like don't even talk anymore. And I love the highs and lows that Moreno-Garcia can bring me along. My second like favorite thing about Moreno-Garcia is her very evocative language. She really has a tendency for making especially like settings pop. Here, I really didn't feel like I had that element fully. Maybe for somebody who is more into horror films, like that kind of fills that gap. But there was a lot of exposition in here. There was a lot of telling and a lot less showing, which when I go into a Moreno-Garcia, like the showing is something that I really am expecting. There were a lot of times that we were just kind of sitting around and being told all of this stuff, either about like the film or the history or the way that our character was putting things together, and it just got to be a little bit too much exposition for me in a book that was also very slow paced. This is like a thing with Moreno-Garcia. She tends to have these really hazy, slow paced stories. Here it was a little bit too slow for me, I think because it was also very exposition heavy, because I felt like I knew the direction we were going, and also there is like a mystery plot core here. You were ultimately trying to figure a few things out, and it just kept ambling along in a way that I wish it moved a little bit faster. I would reread this again. I'm curious to see how it will stay in my memory, but for right now and overall, I would put this at like a 3 or 3.5 out of 5 stars. My goal now is to finish between tonight and tomorrow The Sun in the Void. I'm having such a brain block when it comes to the books that I should be reading, and so something that I do when I am in that mood where I'm like, I don't know what I want to read, I don't want to read anything that I'm in the middle of, and it's just like I said, that kind of brain block, is that I look through audiobooks that are available now on Libby and I just scroll through, and even the scrolling is like unwinding for me. I love just kind of scrolling through what's available, and I saw that How Not to Drown in a Glass of Water by Angie Cruz was available, and it was a short audiobook, and it fits in with Hispanic Heritage Month. It's an author I've been meaning to read, so I was like, oh, okay, I'll just start this. And I started it on Tuesday night before bed, and then yesterday I finished off the last little bit of it before bed. I really loved it. I don't think that I was expecting for it to hit as hard as it did, and I don't think that it is a book that I would recommend widely. This book is about a woman in her mid-50s who during the recession of 2008 lost her job in a factory, and so she has to re-enter the workforce for the first time in decades, and she's like matched up with a job counselor, and over the course of her sessions with this job counselor, she ends up basically like just recounting her life. And so what we're getting through the book is this one-sided conversation with a few snippets of things of her like filling out job applications and things like that. But really the main driver is her just narrating some of her life story. The first reason I wouldn't recommend this widely is that it comes with some content warnings for child abuse and domestic abuse, death of a loved one, and homophobia. And because we're so seated in Kara's point of view, we're like hearing her side of the story, and her side of the story include some of these homophobic things that she said and did towards her son. Her and her son are estranged. Particularly, I think if you have this kind of a relationship with your own mom or your own family where there is that kind of a homophobic sentiment, this I think could be very triggering to read and very difficult to read. And I do think that the book humanizes Kara in a way, but it doesn't excuse her behavior. I think the book is very careful to, even though we're sitting in her point of view, to find ways to like add people telling her like, you're never going to get your son back unless not only do you apologize, but you change your behavior. But at the same time, it acknowledges that Kara is a person who also went through her own traumas and her own traumatic sort of background, and it lets us see that, and it lets us into her own thought process of like wanting to protect her son so much that she in fact like pushed him away without again excusing that behavior. So I absolutely understand why this would not be a story that everybody wants to read and that it would be very triggering, but I thought that it was very impactful. The second thing is that I find that this book is written for a Latine audience, and it does not really care to center a reader experience outside of that. It is unapologetically Dominican, it is unapologetically Latine, and it comes from a place of just assuming that you, the reader, will have the context to understand the story, and I love that. I love it so much. I honestly think that particularly white people could all do with reading stories that are not for them, directed towards them, but I also hesitate because I know that people will go into the story that is not meant for them and either like completely miss the point or rate it lower because they didn't get it or things like that. So it's just one that I would be careful with recommending widely. All of that said, this hit me particularly hard, I think, because of how Dominican it was and how much it reminded me of people that I knew, and how in so few pages I felt so many like wildly different emotions. There were moments that my heart went out to Cara, and there were moments where I was like how could this woman do this, and like the full range of emotions. And there were also all of these other unexpected things about Cara's relationship with her sister and her community, and like the uncertainty of like the job market and the economy, and even like her hopefulness that like Obama would fix everything. There were just so many like neat little tidbits that came into a very short book to give such a great picture of a full life. And I enjoyed this a lot on audiobook because it is someone just narrating their life. But I will say that the audiobook does have sound effects, so you get a little bit of music, you get typing when she's filling out like a job application. But the main sort of like symbolism, I would say, or like, I don't know, visual element that brings you across the book is like a glass of water, right? It's tied to a word that we have in Spanish, and also the fact that every time she comes to the session she's talking so much and drinking a lot of water. But in the audiobook there's also the sound effect of her drinking water. I didn't really notice or pay attention because I listened to my audiobook sped up, so it wasn't something that bothered me. But if like that sound of swallowing, which has bothered me in other audiobooks, it just did not hear, as again because I was listening to it pretty fast. If that's going to bother you, maybe not the audiobook. But also, I don't know, I feel like the audiobook is such a great way to experience this. I think I would give this 5 out of 5 stars, to be honest. My first instinct is always to say like, oh, 4.5. There was something that like didn't quite land, but for me it really, everything hit. It was so tight, it was so economical. Everything that this book set out to do, I think it did well. So it really is 5 out of 5 stars. After I finished reading that last night, because I only had a little bit left, I was like, okay, I'll get back to my TBR. And I kept reading The Sun and the Void, and I have 1 hour left, so I am definitely going to finish that today and hopefully record like the review for TikTok and then talk to you guys about what I thought. I have so many feelings and thoughts on this. I'm still trying to figure out like if I'm just going to update you guys here and do a standalone review, or maybe just give you all my feelings here and then do a TikTok review. I don't know yet, but I will finish that book today. So that will be 3 books that I've read during this vlog, plus another one that I read earlier this month for 4 for September. If I can finish Vampires of El Norte between tonight and tomorrow, and Family Lore on Saturday for 6 books total, yeah. I meant to do more reading yesterday than I actually got to, but work got a little bit away from me. But since the last time that I updated you guys, I did finish reading The Sun and the Void. I still am not completely sure what I want to do in terms of reviewing this. I could spend the next hour of this video just talking about this book, but I'm not sure that I want to do a full standalone review. I don't know. I'm a little torn. So what I will do is just kind of wrap up in broader strokes what I felt about this book, and it was complicated. I'm not sure if I've mentioned yet in this video, but I picked this up because of a review that I saw over on TikTok, and there were some additional reviews on Goodreads that were essentially calling this book problematic. This was a DNF review. They stopped at 35% of the way in, and they talked about the racist elements in here, particularly against Indigenous people. The thing that got me about the review wasn't that like I disagreed because I hadn't read the book. I didn't love sort of the fervor around going after this debut Afro-Latina author, especially because like I rarely see that sort of fervor when I'm trying to talk about like the problematic elements of Sarah J. Maas or Rebecca Yarros or Jennifer L. Armentrout. So to see so many people like, you know, all in on how problematic this book was, there was like an amount of like spreading misinformation about the book that's what it felt like to me in the comments, at least. And people were jumping in and being like, and I heard there was an incestuous relationship, and I heard there was unrepentant baby killing. And it was like so much fervor over making sure that people knew that this book was problematic, this book was racist, that they circled back around to being racist in the comments. There were some things said in that comment section which the poster like apologize. So I don't want to like sit here and belabor this point, but I did want to bring context to like why I started reading this, because I was like, what inspired this, right? And not to say that my opinion is correct and this person who DNF'd is incorrect or anything along those lines. I was just curious about like what inspired this level of passion over problematic content in a book, especially because I suspected that what Romero-Lacruz was trying to do was explore these topics instead of just like present them or stumble into them. So I started reading this. It took me a while because I was reading it pretty slowly and pretty closely, and I had very mixed feelings about like the end result of this, mostly because I think it is an incredibly ambitious work and one that doesn't always achieve exactly what it's going for, and especially because this feels like a debut novel. It feels like it really could have benefited from an additional editing pass and some tightening, and every time that I was most frustrated with the decisions that Romero-Lacruz made, or that like the door was more open to interpretations where it could be like, okay, this is a little problematic, it was just a language thing. Like her meaning could have been firmed up with some rearranging and like different language choices, because as I suspected, I do think what Romero-Lacruz is doing in this book is like a purposeful exploration of these themes. This fantasy world is based in some part on Venezuelan or like Latine culture and history, like colonial history. And in this world, we have Vadcos and Nosariels and Yares living alongside humans, right? So these are all different kinds of people. We follow two main points of view. One is Reina, who is a Nosariel, who is in a very bad situation. The Nosariels used to be enslaved and they were freed, but they are still basically in a bottom caste of society. And so she is living in a bad situation that she manages to escape when her estranged grandmother invites her to come and join her, where she's living with a wealthy Valco family and serving as their basically like resident witch. So Reina travels there, and on the way there she's attacked by these shadow creatures in this world called tinieblas, and she almost dies. So her grandmother, in order to save her life, gives her something of a heart transplant, but it comes with like the thing that I've been comparing it to is like Iron Man's you know, the thing he has that keeps the shrapnel from going into his heart. She has a sort of crystal embedded into her heart, into her skin, that is keeping the poison of the tinieblas from taking her heart, but it has to be topped off with one of the rarest elements of this world, which the Aguila family have complete control over. So Reina becomes dependent not only on her grandmother and her grandmother's goodwill, but on this family and their store of iridium. The second point of view is Eva Casare, who's living with the human side of her family, but she is half Valco, and again she is very othered by her family. And because Eva has a natural affinity for magic, they're constantly telling her that she basically has this darkness in her. So she's grown up in this very toxic environment when she learns of another Valco family, which are the Aguilas, and she sees her way free from the situation by contacting them, but things turn out to be way more complicated than she imagined. It's a lot. It's a lot of plot, it's a lot of world, it's a lot of characters, it's a lot of like magic elements. There's not a lot of like hard magic explanation to some of these things. We just get the vibes that there are like some magical elements and some of these people who have more affinity for magic and things along those lines, but it's not a super complex or hard magic system. It is just a soft magic system with a lot of different elements. One of the things I wish the story had done was unburden itself a little bit, maybe take out one plot point and a couple of characters and let it breathe. It is interesting because it is a very full fantasy that has a slower pace, especially in the beginning. It takes us a while to sort of build to where we are going. That pace does pick up in the second half, and there were things happening in the second half that truly like it had me interested, and there were like little, at least one thing that happened at the end that I was like, oh my god, like that is so good. So I really appreciated the pace of the second half of the book a little more than like the slower pace of the beginning. I was was interested in the characters. I read a lot of like 1-star reviews where people were saying the characters were flat. Both Eva and Reina don't have a lot of agency, but that goes right along with like the themes of oppression that this is exploring. And particularly for our two main characters, it's not only sort of societal oppression, but their families, right, are not treating them well, are not giving them a lot of agency. They're being othered by even like the people in their family. So both of these women are struggling for agency, and they both make really big decisions that in order to achieve that agency, in order to like better their lot in life, that come with a lot of consequences. They do from morally gray to straight out bad things in order to achieve it. So it makes them very complex characters. If you are somebody who struggles when there isn't a lot of agency for our main characters, that's something to keep in mind. But my heart went out to both of these characters. Like, I was stressed for them. I was wondering how they were going to get out of situations. There was an amount that I felt like as a reader, I was seeing things way more clearly than they were, especially in Reina's case. There is a naivety about her. Sometimes it was like an outright like things will be fine sort of naivety, and sometimes she was very clear-eyed about like, I know that this is not right, but all I want is family. All I want is to belong, and if I have to do XYZ in order to achieve that, like, I will. And so that was like, there were times where she was like very like aware of what was happening, and yet and still there were things that come up at the end that she is shocked by, that I think you the reader are like, duh, like of course it was going to be like this terrible thing there, because there is an amount that even though Reina knows on some level that she's being manipulated, she still has that like some part of her hopes that like she can get what she wants out of this relationship with her grandmother. So all of that, like, I felt for the characters, and again, I was interested in reading about them. I will say that this comes with a lot of strong content warnings, and particularly for some of the things that people are interpreting as problematic here. So this is an exploration of racism and colonialism and anti-indigenous sentiment. So both of our main characters are mixed race, and I think that that is important to keep in mind, because really Romero Lacruz is writing from a place of her own lived experience, right? There is a long tradition and history in science fiction and fantasy of othering the people of color in terms of like making them the aliens or giving them like extra human features, and I absolutely understand like not wanting to see that anymore in media, but I think it's a little bit different when Romero Lacruz is using this, taking something that has been wielded by white people and using it to explore themes of racism and othering. I was tracking this, and like every time that the characters sort of express some sort of internalized racism, right? They call themselves monsters, they call themselves bad, they call themselves evil, because this is the language that has been used against them. There is some way that that is countered on page, right? Either they say like, I'm a monster, that's what everybody has always said about me. So you clearly see that this is something that is ingrained in them, or some other characters like, don't say that about yourself. So there is work that is being done to show you the way that this racism has affected our main characters. While I felt that there was enough work done to show you that this is not a message that the author is condoning, right? There's a difference between exploring and presenting something, and those can be very difficult reading experiences, but that's not condoning, and that doesn't make the work problematic. Like, was there unrepentant baby killing in this? No. There's a big trigger warning for child death in this, I would say. It is referenced. It's not like we sit on page and like watch it happen. It is referenced a number of times. So if that is a trigger for you, this is something that I would be very wary of. However, the entire thing that Reina is really repentant about this, and she realizes like what a bad thing this is, and she's justifying it to herself through so many different means. And our main character is not the one that is like necessarily doing the killing, which is how she justifies this all to herself. So to like read this and say that it's unrepentant, right? Or that the author is like, again, condoning the murder of children. I don't think that that's necessarily a good faith read, but you know, another thing people said was that like the sapphic relationship in here was incestuous, or that like, I don't know, a lot of people had things to say about like the sapphic relationship in here because it was promoted, I think, to some degree as being sapphic. I mean, our main character is attracted to women, and she makes that clear from the onset. There are two sort of relationships in here, and I would argue that the main one is actually not a romantic one. It is unrequited. It is like a first love exploration. It is Reina attaching herself to the first person who was ever kind to her in her life. I think it is very clear again for the reader, like more clear to us than to Reina what this relationship actually is. So we're kind of watching the slow car crash happen. And then later on in the book, we do get introduced to a second character who serves as a love interest for the main character, but their relationship starts off antagonistic. So this character thinks certain things about Nos Ariels because she's a product of this society. Reina is involved in some way in the kidnapping of this woman, so there are complicated feelings there. So they start off very antagonistic. It graduates to like some snippy banter that is also like begrudging thawing, and then they become friends, and then it ends on something a little bit more romantic, but again at the very end. I wouldn't say that this has a strong romantic element, but it does have a bunch of main characters attracted to women. Now there is a little bit of a reveal of information at the end that Reina and her first love are actually cousins, and they didn't know, and they shared one kiss before, one that was like again one-sided, and that was like the other person involved was like, I'm not really feeling it. So they shared a kiss, then they learned they're cousins. At that point, the romantic part of the relationship has already kind of crashed and burned. There's also an element that incest is talked about in terms of like the Valcos are dying out. There are only a few Valcos left in the world, and so in order to not completely die out, there has been some in-marrying in the past. And so Celeste's parents briefly talk about marrying her off to her uncle, and her mother is like, no, we're not going to do that, and they move on. It is mentioned like one or two other times that this has been a Valco practice in the past, is like in-marrying in order to not die off. And then we have the cousin kiss before they know that they are cousins, but that is also not like the relationship you're supposed to be rooting for. Again, trigger warnings for incest that is discussed in this one on-page kiss before anybody knows what's going on. But do I think that the author is condoning incest or promoting incest like any more than like George R.R. Martin? You know, no, personally, but that's just my read on things. And then the final thing is that people talked about this being ableist because Reina does receive that magical heart transplant. And now this magical heart transplant, particularly the crystals and her dependence on iridio, really symbolize a number of things throughout the story. And one is her dependence on her grandmother and on this wealthy family. And then we have this additional thing of it really symbolizing her sort of corruption, or like the way that she's willing to do different like bad things in order to both stay alive because she is now dependent on this iridio, and to belong because she is desperate to have family and to have safety and to have a place to belong. Reina did not choose to have this procedure done. She did not consent to it. She wakes up and there's this thing protruding from her chest, and it's got scars and the wounds are a little bit open. So she has a lot of feelings about her own body and the way that it has changed. I would say again that this has huge trigger warnings for sort of anybody who has had heart transplants or like major medical intervention or emergency intervention. I think the thing that opens it up to like the interpretation that this is ableist is that Reina often talks about her monstrous heart, right? The idea that like she is being corrupted, the idea that this like crystal, the iridio, actually connects her to the void magic, the essentially like the devil of this world, right? She can hear voices in her head because of the iridio in her heart, not because of the actual organ or the organ transplant, but because of the crystals and the elements that are keeping her alive. But it's close enough, right? This idea of like the crystals and the iridio to this idea of a heart transplant that I can definitely see people saying, nope, this is ableist because of the way that it's used. I am not a recipient of a heart transplant. I have a chronic condition that is not associated at all with like hearts or anything like that. But in my personal media analysis, I think that the author again did enough, like 95% of the time on text, to clarify what she meant when she was like my monstrous heart, or when she talked about like the iridio or the crystals examples are the heart transplant, so that you got the sense that the author wasn't saying that all heart transplants are bad, but it's specifically exploring the way that this intervention that Reina received without her consent and that like purposefully attached her to her oppressors was something that she had some very complicated feelings about. Again, it is probably part of a longer history of how disability is portrayed in science fiction and fantasy, so like making the decision that you don't want to read this at all, I think is fair from that perspective. Overall, I would give this a 3.5 out of 5 stars. I think it was interesting. I think it attempted a lot. I think it had good moments, and I think that there was a lot of room for improvement. I would read book 2, and I'm super interested to see where this author goes, especially as she leans more into her own voice. There was a lot of like very convoluted language in here in a way that I felt was trying to capture like the style of magical realism and Latine fantasy, which can be very wordy and flowery, but I think that the author was still stumbling a little bit around finding her own voice and finding word choices that felt more additive, that were both flowery and descriptive and beautiful, but didn't become sort of like a garbled mouthful. And she didn't always hit that stride, especially in the beginning of this book. I think that does calm down in like the second half of the book, where she stops like overly relying on a lot of this sort of packed description, but it is there. So yes, 3.5 out of 5 stars. I guess that was like the entire review. I did it. After I finished reading that, I finished it at night, and I just wanted something easy to listen to, so I started You Had Me at Hola by Alexis Daria, and I listened to just the first couple of chapters of that, and since then I have read a few more chapters of Vampires of El Norte, so I think today I'm going to focus on listening to Vampires and You Had Me at Hola, and we'll see which of those, or if both of those, I can finish them up with today's reading. That means I will not be getting to family lore probably, so you'll see me talk about those, I'm sure, in some other place in the future. As for plans today, I want to finish what I started last week, which was like a deep clean of my depression den. So I've got a number of chores to do, some decorating to finish in terms of putting out my fall stuff, and listening to books and relaxing. Really, that's it. Reading You Had Me at Hola and Vampires of El Norte on Saturday. All my pumpkins and fall decor is out. I really enjoyed You Had Me at Hola. I thought it was very sweet and cute and easily readable. Basically, this is about two main characters who are starring opposite each other on like a new show for a streaming service. Both of them have backgrounds, her in soap operas and him in telenovelas, and now they're doing this like telenovela inspired show for a streaming service, and it could be a big break for both of them, and for their own reasons they are like determined not to get involved with each other because that always gets messy, but of course they end up falling in feelings and then falling in love. I like both of the main characters. Even when they were kind of being obtuse, I still like understood where they were coming from, which is always what I want from a romance. I have two quibbles with this. One is that I felt like we were repeating some of the internal stuff a little bit too much. There was a lot of like spelling out all of the feelings, and I love to be shown that stuff without necessarily told. Like I want to feel the angst. I want to be able to interpret some of that internal work through like dialogue and through descriptions, and this was very like I felt this way, and then if I do this, this will happen, and consequences like every time, and it got to be a little bit too much and too repetitive for me personally. And then I really enjoyed like the family aspects of this and like a lot of the Latine surrounding culture of this, but a couple of times it just felt a little bit like on the nose, and when you get things on the nose that way, it starts to feel a little bit like an after school special. But overall, like I said, I had a great time listening to it. I have enjoyed Alexis Daria books in the past, and I would continue reading on in the series. It was an incredibly solid 4 stars. And then finally, I finished Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. First of all, I will say that this is a historical romance that has splashes of like some speculative elements, including vampires. If you go in here expecting either vampires or expecting horror or like wanting those things, I understand why this would be a letdown, but I don't blame this book for what it's not or for my own sort of expectations, because I think that what it did very, very well. Nena is a daughter of a ranchero, and Nestor is her best friend when they are kids. One day they sneak out together in the middle of the night and they are attacked by essentially vampires. So Nestor brings Nena home. She is gravely injured and he believes that she is dead. So he runs away from the rancho in his grief. We fast forward to 9 years later. Nena is not dead. Nestor is back home because of the threat of the United States invading Mexico. And this was so full of angst. And I'm not usually somebody who like loves a ton of angst or like who loves books that are sort of propelled by angst, and I think that this mostly was. There is a kind of miscommunication happening between our two main characters because they both believed one thing about the other, and it was right on that border for me as well of like, usually I don't enjoy that sort of thing, but I did here because I was so invested in the main characters. But also, like, had it gone on a little bit longer, I was right on the edge of like where I was like, okay, all right, already, let's go. But I also understood that both of them had like lived this lie for so long that unpacking that took some time. And also they were like kind of being manipulated by the people around them. They were being lied to by outside forces. So it just kind of kept compounding this like big miscommunication between them. I really enjoy Cañas's writing. The writing itself is so full of metaphors and simile and comparisons, and I just thought that it brought this really rich atmosphere and setting to life. I was just enjoying reading her words, which is great because through the middle this really slows down. It does become, like I said, very character driven, angst driven, and so you need something to propel you. And for me, it was just like enjoyment of like the rich language and also investment in these two main characters. I think it is so impressive how Cañas made me feel so immediately for these characters. I was 1 or 2 chapters in and I was already like, I love them, Your Honor. Protect them at all costs. I also really happen to enjoy stories that are doing like one main thing and then they just splash a little something else on top. Some examples include The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno-Garcia, which also feels like a historical romance that has telekinesis and magic sort of splashed on top. An Absolutely Remarkable Thing by Hank Green feels like this coming of age story that is really concerned about this main character and identity and fame, and then it's got like robots sort of hanging out in the back. As that series goes on, like the sci-fi element becomes more pronounced, but I love how it's just like robots in the background to like this character stuff that is happening. I would also argue that Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson is this way. It is also a coming of age story and really heavily focuses on our main character and his day-to-day, really. You're just kind of going through his life with him, but he is the son of a trickster, and there is kind of this shadow, this like looming of like getting closer and closer to the actual like fantasy magic element of this. But for the most part, you're just kind of like hanging out and getting to know Jared. You know, those are 3 books that off the top of my head that are like this that I absolutely love, and so it doesn't bother me that this is primarily doing one thing, historical romance, relationship, character driven, but it has all of these like extra elements for either symbolism or thematic content or commentary. And here, you know, I read through a lot of like 1 and 2 star reviews for this because that's something I always do. If I enjoyed something, I read criticisms of it, and a lot of people were like upset that they came into this book and there weren't more vampires. It says vampires right there, but I feel like even in the title and just knowing what you do from the blurb, it's like super clear to me that the vampires, like whether or not they were in the story, that they were like symbolic of something, of El Norte, like and it's like set in Mexico during the US invasion. Like, I don't know, it felt very clear that this was like a symbolic thing. There are vampires here, to be clear, but they're very much in the background, and so penalizing this book for like not having enough vampires when I think it is very clear about how it's using vampires, even from the title and the blurb, I think it's not entirely fair, but that is a good thing to know, is that the speculative elements of this are cherry on top. So yeah, I really had a good time with this. I feel like this is even better than the Hacienda, which I had similar issues in terms of like the pacing and the plotting and like firming some things up. And I think still here, some of that middle could have been firmed up, but it makes me really excited to just keep reading from Cañas. I feel like she could continue to get better and better, but even as it is right now, I feel like because I enjoy her writing so much, and she's usually doing things that are like at the cusp of several different genres, I will be paying attention to her career. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. Yeah. That's it for me today. Thank you for following me along on like over a week or whatever this was. It was fun. I had fun. And I'm looking forward to finishing off the year strong. My entire spring and summer were just so hectic because of the whole job search thing and like not being in the right mood for reading, but I'm hoping to finish off the last 3 months of this year like reading more consistently, being in a better headspace for reading, being in a better headspace for creating content, and all of that jazz. If you have read or would like to read any of the books that I've mentioned, let's chat down in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you guys soon.